In the name of the Father, and Son, and the Holy Ghost, amen. So today is the day after Epiphany. And tomorrow, the Feast of the Holy Family. Going to be back here again in Melbourne. Just a few brief considerations. Today, on this Saturday, up in Brisbane, Bishop Sanborn, I believe, is making his very first visit. And I'm told it's his first visit anyway to Australia, at least in many, many years. And given a 4-hour conference on Sedevacantism. And, and essentially the theme will be something like God would not allow the true Pope to make universal bad laws. He would not allow the true Pope to preach and profess heresy to the harm of the whole church. And this goes against the goodness of God that he would allow such a thing. And the church teaches that there can be, if a man is a heretic, he's outside the church. And of course the head is a member of the church. And of course, being a heretic, Paul VI, being a heretic, all these last 6 popes, all the way up until the present Pope Francis, they clearly are not members of the church, and therefore cannot be head of the church, and therefore we have nothing to do with them, and they don't pray for him during the Mass, and so on. But today we're in the middle of this octave of the Feast of Epiphany, which means God shows himself, the divine manifestation. And God has told us that he shows himself in his holy church, which is called the kingdom of heaven. And he promised in the Gospel of St. Matthew chapter 13 that according to the divine promise, there will be, from the beginning of time, that is from Adam, the first head of the church, until the very end of time, that is the end of the world, there will always be cockle and weeds inside the true church. He even emphasizes it in another part of the Gospel of St. Matthew where he says, it must needs be that scandals come. It must needs be. God speaking. It must needs be. And he says the kingdom of heaven is like unto a sower that went out to sow good seed in a field. That's what Christ came to do. And he sowed good seed in the field, but in the morning the servants found that there was cockle and weeds amongst this, and they came to the master and said, How is it? How is it that there is cockle amongst the wheat? And he said, An enemy has done this. And the word enemy is Satanas. Satan has done this. Who told us that Satan would walk in the field of the church? Who told us that there would be cockle in the midst of the wheat? It was Jesus Christ himself. And if you find a church, as Bishop Sheen used to say, how can there be a church in which there can be saints unless in that same church there can also be sinners? Unless you're able to be a sinner, you cannot be a saint. You have to have a free will. You have to be able to choose God freely. And if you're able to choose God freely, you're able to reject God freely. And therefore, there can only be saints in a church that allows sinners. And our Lord Jesus Christ made his church the church of saints. And it is he who said, there will be cockle amongst the wheat. It is he who chose 12 apostles. And if you look at the numbers, 12 out of 12 of them ran away. It's a bad percentage. Last I checked, it was 100%. 12 out of 12 ran away. And Bishop Sheen says, the first act of the Pope, in union with all the bishops, was to flee the garden. And there have been many other times when the Pope, in union with the bishops, have fled the garden. And many other times in which the Pope has said, I do not know the man. How do we know that our church is divine? If our church required good men, required strong men, required brave men, required holy men in order to be holy, then the men would make the church holy, and it would be a very manly church. But if our church can have wicked men and sinful men, and men who are even working directly for Satan, and yet still be holy, and yet still save souls, and yet still be able to form saints, then the only explanation is that God must be in that church. When you go to confession, you kneel before a priest, and Suarez says, holiness and jurisdiction does not always require great holiness. For instance, a priest who is left the priesthood and who worships the devil, as we mentioned the other day, and who does not follow the law of God. If someone is dying on the streets, that priest who left the priesthood, who doesn't believe in God, can go and anoint him and can give him absolution, which can only be done by the jurisdiction of the church. And through the wicked and sinful priest, a soul goes to heaven. And so the holiness of the church does not depend upon the holiness of the individuals. And St. Paul himself even said that. He said, lest preaching to others and saving others, I myself be a castaway. This is what the greatest of all the apostles said. He said, I can save others. I can preach the truth. I can give the gospel. I can be an inspiration from the Holy Ghost. And my soul can still be damned. Because that's called a grace ex opere operato. Or that's a gratia gratis data. That's a gift given by God to the priest to save other souls. But it's possible that while he's an instrument to save other souls, he can lose his own soul. Because the holiness of the church is from God. And we see the power of the church when you see idiots become popes. You see the power of the church when you see wicked men go in high places. You see the power of the church when you see the evil of the devil try to infiltrate it at every moment. When 33 Jews gathered together shortly after the crucifixion and took an oath and a vow that they would bring an end to Christ's church. And from hence comes the 33 degrees of Masonry. And these 33 Jews vowed to Satan they would destroy the church. And they devoted themselves and their followers over the last 2,000 years to destroying Holy Mother the Church. They cannot destroy it. The devil can get inside of a pope and make him wicked if he chooses to follow the pope, the devil. He can make the bishops become wicked if they choose to follow them. He can make the priests become wicked if they choose to follow him. But he cannot touch even the smallest bit of the holiness of the church. The church's holiness stays. The church is divine. And we know that it shall remain until the end of times. And we also know that there shall be wicked priests until the end of times, wicked bishops until the end of time, and at various times wicked popes, because there's only one pope at one time, so you can't have two wicked popes at the same time, except for now. We've got a special privilege in our times. We got Pope Benedict and Pope Francis. So we got two wicked popes, special privilege for our times. But only one of them is the real pope. There can only be one wicked pope at one time. And one of the great challenges, one of the great problems of the grave error of Sedevacantism is the lack of the vision of the supernatural nature of our church. That God made it holy, and no matter how unholy are his ministers, he will still be holy in his church. And therefore there can be popes who profess heresy. There can be popes who use the power of their papacy to lead souls away from God because of selfishness. One such pope was Caiaphas, the last pope of the Old Testament, who used the fullness of his power and the fullness of his authority to bring about the crucifixion of our Lord Jesus Christ. And God allowed it. And why does he allow it? To chisel and form saints. It is one of the mysteries of life that if everything goes well for us, we tend to become proud. We tend to turn away from God. But if we have struggles, if we have difficulties, if we have wars, if we have persecutions, then we can become strong and we can survive and we can go to heaven more easily. And therefore, God allows there to be wicked rulers. He allows there to be wicked priests, such as the wicked priests and the wicked bishops that put St. Joan of Arc to death. He allows there to be infiltrators in the church. And the Sedevacantists often say, but there's AA 1025. And there's Masons inside the church. Well, there have always been Masons inside the church, the followers of Satan. There have always been infiltrators inside the church. Remember in the very beginning, Judas infiltrated the church. He made a deal with the enemies of God to betray Christ. And he's had faithful followers to make sure that there was never a single vacancy in the position of traitor from the time that Judas hung himself on Good Friday morning until the very end of the world. There will always be traitors amongst the priests. There will always be traitors in the church. There will always be those who use their sacred priesthood and their holy mark of baptism in order to betray Christ. But the holiness of the church remains. And so we must remember the holiness of our church goes beyond the power of the wickedness of a wicked man. God does not need the strength of a holy pope. He does not need the strength of holy bishops and holy priests. He conquers the devil by his own power through the ministration of the instruments that he chooses. And he will make sure that at each time in the church there will be some holy priests. There will be some holy faithful Catholics. He will make sure there are always some few. He himself said by divine prophecy that at the end of the world there will be very few that are holy. This is the prophecy of God. So if we see that one of the main arguments in Sedevacantism, God would not allow the whole church to go astray. And yet it says it in the gospel. The whole church will go astray. Who said that? God said that. And there will be very few that don't go astray. How are they going to go astray? Because of wicked faithful, wicked sheep, wicked priests, and wicked bishops, and wicked popes listening to Satan and using their power to bring souls away from God. And yet while they do that, the grace of God still remains powerful in the church, and he will still conquer all these wicked souls, and he will have his great victory. And there will be the conversion of sinners, and we just have to have confidence in that and wait for the victory of our Holy Mother. In any case, God still shows himself in a special way in a church that still has sinners in it. We'll let it close with that. God bless you all. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.